Welcome back to Boiler Wild. My name is Eric Johnson, and on this podcast, talk about boiler industry topics as well as personal development. Both of them go hand in hand. I want to get better as a person, and I hope you should too. You should also strive to grow in your career, and I think the boiler industry is a very interesting place with a lot of career opportunities and a lot of different avenues. And I hope to open your mind to some different perspectives and help you learn and grow and be a better person. WILD may think that is a interesting name. WILD is actually an acronym I came up with. Stands for work hard, invest in yourself, lead others, and develop yourself into a person of excellence. So today's podcast, man, I'll tell you what. So I try to ruck every single day, and that rucking is just walking around with a weighted backpack. And I'll walk 4 miles every day around my neighborhood. And I was walking on a sidewalk next to kind of like a main road, but there's grass on either side of me, 10 feet. I'm not like right on the road, but the sidewalk is enough off the main road that, it's a sidewalk that's separated from the road, and the main road doesn't have any bike lanes or anything. And it's just like a split lane, 2-lane road, but not something you would really want to ride a bike on. But I was wearing headphones, and I try to stay aware of my surroundings, but I was walking and I hear a bell behind me, and I always try to walk on the right-hand side of a sidewalk, but a sidewalk is not even 3 feet wide, if it's 3 feet wide. So there's not a lot of room on a sidewalk, but walking on the sidewalk, I hear a bell behind me, and I turn around and I walk into the grass. But by the time I do that, this guy, he had to be probably in his 60s, goes out on the grass, and he has an e-bike with like fat tires and everything. And this grass is it's like normal grass, but he like swerves out onto the grass, and it's an e-bike. So it's basically a motorcycle. He's not pedaling. He's just riding along. And then, but when he gets in front of me, he never looked back, but he put his hand up and let me know that he's my number one fan. And I was just thinking, like, I'm walking on a sidewalk, and I'm sorry I didn't get out of the way of your e-bike fast enough that you had to go off-roading on some flat grass with the fat tires on your e-bike, and you get all mad at me. Like, I don't know. I don't understand that. That's something, I don't know. Yeah, not that I've lived a long life, but you live long enough that you are not surprised anymore, and you wonder like what goes through people's heads in the fact that, like, what did he expect? For me to jump out of the way the second I heard his bell so that he could keep cruising down the sidewalk without having to go around me and be inconvenienced on his e-bike? I don't know. The same thing with driving. Like, man, I used to drive 30 to 40,000 miles a year. And once you do that for a couple years, you are not surprised at all by people and what they do, how people are distracted driving, scrolling Facebook and social media, texting, doing their makeup, reading books. I've seen it all. And even like people like cutting you off and like pulling out in front of you because they know you'll stop and slam on the brakes. Like, if insurance wasn't such a pain and hitting you wouldn't actually take up more time and money from me, I would go ahead and hit you, because some people, they pull right out in front of you and they just like, they'll stop. So I'm good. I have a crappy car anyways. I don't care if they hit me. I'm uninsured. Yeah, like, I don't know. It's kind of goes back. I was thinking about that, and I've had my bad days. I've had my good days in the job, and I think we all have. But so when you work at other facilities, even if you work in a company internally, but it's a lot of other facilities, and you don't have any relationship with the contact. Like, you may like have met them before or whatnot, but you don't like work with them all the time and chat and all this stuff. So like, especially if you're a service tech, but if you're a welder or anything and you're working at another facility and you have to deal with people that you've never met, and sometimes they can take out anger on you. And it's not always the yelling and screaming and whatnot anger. Like, there is that's less and less though these days. But there is more of the like the harsh words, like you I've had tons of these calls where you're a service technician and I go out, and you have to present the customer a very expensive situation. And it's like there's no way around it. And it's like, well, it's either this or it's either that, and it has to be this in order to get the job fixed. And then they get like mad at you because, how long does this take? Oh, well, we'll have to order the parts, and like your boiler may not work for a couple days, and whatnot. And like, then they get mad at you like, oh, we can't have the boiler down. That's not good enough. And now you're jumping through hoops to try to make them happy. But you also know that like they do bare minimum maintenance, but that I've learned that sometimes is just their personality, but sometimes it's just, their boss getting mad at them. Because they're responsible for the boiler, and when the boiler's not running, production doesn't run or whatever, and then their bosses get mad at them, so they pass the pressure on to you. I was working at a facility, they make wax, and working late. It was forget if it was a call out or whatnot, but man, it was a mess. It ended up being like they had leaks on their feed water line, and I had to replace a bunch of feed water piping and had to clean the boiler. It was like sooted or something and all kinds of stuff. And I ended up getting the boiler running, and it was, decently late, 6, 7 o'clock. And I, like to clean up after myself. So I put I had, the feed water pipe was only, probably 10, 15 feet of piping. And, then you have fittings and whatnot, check valve and everything. And I replaced all that because it didn't work on the boiler. There was a check valve, the swing check that didn't work. And then the gate valve didn't hold tight. So I had to replace it all. And I took the old stuff, I cleaned up, I took the old stuff to scrap, I threw it on my truck to scrap it, and the customer contact was totally fine with that and everything. And then the next day I get a call from my sales guy that they're not happy that I'm stealing from them, and that I didn't do a good job, and that I left a mess and all this stuff. And I was like, a mess? Like, I cleaned up and everything. They're like, oh, well, you didn't sweep the floor all the way. And what had happened was there were old tubes, boiler tubes that had been pulled out of the boiler laying along the floor. And there was like a mess around them, and not anything that I really made. I may have contributed to it a little bit, but there was already a mess there. But the contact, like the maintenance person, the guy that I was working with, my contact on site, his boss came through the boiler room and got all mad at him, and he obviously is not going to stick up for me. I don't know what happened, but so then his boss is calling my boss that I'm awful and they never want me back, and I'm stealing from them because I took $20 of scrap or whatever instead of just leaving the parts on the floor of the boiler room when the customer contact told me to clean it all up. Like, I'm just throwing away. Like, they got put in the bin with the trash and they'll be sorted later. But like, I didn't realize you wanted all the scrap, and oh, well, you're stealing from us because you replaced the check valve, and the check valve, we didn't think it's bad, so we want the old check valve, and you need to prove it's bad to us. And it's like, well, that was one of the problems that was happening, was the boiler was going down a little water and the pumps were running all the time because the check valve was bad. So on top of the feed water pipe leaking, and of course, half of it was rotted, and you touch one side of the feed water pipe, and you're trying not to redo the whole pipe because it's like 6 or 7 o'clock at night, and you're not trying to be there all night replacing feed water piping. But turn it into this giant ordeal of, we never want this guy back here. He's terrible. You're terrible. He did all this extra work that he didn't have to do. He replaces parts because he's trying to make more money from us, and all this nonsense. And I had thought I did the best job I could, and I was communicating with my customer contact, but it just turned out that the customer's contact boss walks through the boiler room, and all of a sudden now everything is a problem, and I can't tell my side. It's always just, you see it from a different lens. But that kind of bothered me because I try to always do my best, try to always clean up, and try to make the customer happy. But sometimes you're put in a situation where you walk into a boiler room, and if everything's rotted and things are falling apart and a lot of stuff is half working, valves are barely moving, valves don't hold, and there's just I mean, if you worked in boiler rooms, you know what I'm talking about, where it's obvious that the customer doesn't care about their boiler room, but then the minute you touch something, now it's your fault. And oh, this didn't happen before you were here, like, you need to replace this. This should be free. You caused this problem. And the same thing with condensate lines. If you don't treat your condensate lines will rot out, and it can be, I've had condensate lines just crush when I touch it with my hand. And when you get condensate lines that are so thin, when you can crush them with your hand, it's like, where do you stop replacing the condensate line? There's no end to it. But you try to fix the leak, but the minute you put a pipe wrench on it, you're disturbing other fittings and lines that now start leaking, and it turns into this giant job. Yeah, but I mean, there's so many times where I've gone into boiler rooms, and you just try to you try to do your best. You want to fix the problem that the customer has or thinks they have, but it just ends up being this ever expanding scope of work, and you can't ever get on the same page of the customer due to multiple reasons. But it just goes, it goes back to, you have to build up a resiliency of knowing that you can only do so much, and no matter what you do, even if you do things correctly, people will get mad at you. I mean, this goes to even posting stuff on the internet. You can post some very non-controversial stuff on the internet, but eventually somebody's going to find something wrong with what you post and get mad at you and think you're wrong or something. And that's fine. You can't let it get to you. You can't let people flipping you off when you're walking down a sidewalk, because you inconvenience them on their e-bike. You can't let that get to you. And for so many years, when I was a service technician, just trying to please customers and rise to their expectations. And, it's hard when you're, getting billed out at $100 some an hour, and parts are, $1,000 or whatnot for a float, for a, boiler, and you say, hey, you need a low water cutoff and this and that, and all of a sudden it's a $6,000 bill. And they're like, whoa, like we just called you up. We just wanted a service call. And it's like, yeah, like here, here's a couple parts. Here's what's wrong. And, 2 days labor. And, they can get mad at you, they can, and then they, disagree with, oh, I didn't think that was bad or this is bad, but, you've gotten their approval. You talked through them. But when you start, it's easy to get approvals and everything and say, oh, yeah, we don't need a quote. We don't need a quote. But then when you start putting some money on the page, they're shocked by what stuff costs. And you're like, well, you approved it without a quote. So, and it's not like you're ripping them off. It's stuff is expensive. Labor is expensive. Industrial boilers are expensive. There's no cheap boilers where you just go in, oh yeah, $20 part, that'll be $45. Where do we bill you? Like, to have somebody show up is $150 minimum. So, I mean, if you haven't learned already, older people have learned this, but if you're younger, just you will eventually learn that you can't please everybody, and you have to do your best, clearly communicate, but at a certain point in time, somebody will misunderstand what you are doing, or they will have a boss who is putting pressure on them, or they have, something in their life that is causing them stress. Maybe, their spouse just died, or they're getting a divorce, or, they have issues with their kids, or, family issues or whatnot. And that just ends up coming out at work, and you're just the young person showing up, and hey, I'm here to fix your boiler, or hey, I'm here to weld in whatever, and then then they get mad at you for seemingly no reason. Like, whoa, like what did I do wrong? And a lot of times it's so easy to take that personally, and to just like be like, man, like, what did I do wrong? And now it puts you in a bad mood, and you start thinking like, man, maybe I did something wrong, and all this stuff. Like, as long as you come from a position of giving people grace and and understanding that not everybody can clearly communicate their emotions, and they also allow emotions from other things come out when they communicate to you, you will be in a better place career wise, and even as a human. Even, you can be standing in the grocery store and, you know, say, excuse me to the person in front of you, at a cash register or something, and they could just like get super mad at you, blow up at you. It's the sooner you can learn that some people are just having a rough day, nothing's gone good. They found out their dog died that morning, like, and then you just give them grace, and you just don't take it personally, and do some self-reflection. Like, hey, like, I didn't do anything to cause that reaction. They overreacted. That's obviously not on me. And I just hope that they can solve that. And, I don't wish any ill will on them, and you move on with your life. The sooner you can learn that and take that to heart, then the easier life will be. There's so many, like I said, there's so many days I had trying to, move heaven and earth for customers, and it seemed like nothing I could do was correct. Nothing I was right. And it would make me mad, and I would, it ruined my day. And if it was a Friday, I'd think about it all weekend. And, it just comes down from, like, I don't even know, like, humans being humans. But I've learned that now that I'm, posting more on the internet, I post a lot on LinkedIn, some YouTube videos, that some people have a wildly different perspective than I do. And, you just agree to disagree it, and people can take stuff in the wrong context and they've lived different lives than you. And if you take everything personally, man, you will get weighed down with what other people think. And you just have to, at some point, learn to understand that you have no ill will towards them and you are doing your best and you got to just continue on. I wouldn't say I receive a ton of online hate right now. I mean, my online following, I post on LinkedIn, try it every day, but I only have like 3,500 followers, which is nothing in the grand scheme of things. And YouTube, I barely have any subscribers. So I wouldn't say I consistently get hate, but I do have a couple names in my mind that I can think of who have DM'd me or they'll comment on a post, and it's always something crazy. And it's just you brush it off and you keep going. You can't let them bring you down, get better to you, and you live and you learn. But it's I would say there's a self-awareness to it of did I overstep? Did I do anything here? But in most cases, you probably didn't, and they just are either out to pick a fight or they have something else going on in their life that you're not aware of, and that's just bubbling over at you. And once you learned that not everything is in your control and you can't please everybody, you will be well on your way. And I mean that's like, that's probably one of the biggest things I've learned in my 9 years working professionally in a career. And I mean, you learn that before you even start working, but career wise, once you start putting money in people's jobs on the line, everything gets kind of weird. And people, especially when you're the person, the expert, the service technician in the boiler room that has to deliver the news of, hey, your boiler is not going to run, and then all of a sudden that sets this domino effect of, well, we now have to send the shift home, and now the plant manager is going to call me and tell me, well, why isn't the boiler running? And oh, you gave me a timeline of 3 days, 4 days. Why can't it be faster? Why can't you start working on this tonight? And all this stuff. It's just external pressures that you cannot control. And, a lot of times people will just take stuff out on you that's not your fault. And, I don't know, this is kind of a different podcast, but I mean, I've noticed that, maybe it's trendy in 2025, but people just not giving other people grace and not understanding that, some people live a hard life. Some people are going through something that they, change their entire personality from it, and they're not thinking correctly. And everybody wants to jump on each other's throats for everything in person and online. But the minute you stay, calm, cool, and collected, and you just kind of stay in your lane and you're like, well, I know I'm trying to do my best and I am positively contributing to the world, and whatever the reaction is whatever it is, but I'm going to keep doing what I do and I will treat them with grace. So we probably need more of that as humans, in 2025, shoot, we're halfway, it's August. In a couple months, it's going to be 2026, but lead with grace and then understand that not everyone will react logically to what you do, especially in the boiler room, especially when you have to deliver them bad news of, hey, this is going to be expensive, or this is going to be a long timeline, or hey, we need to do this and this and this. And, it ends up, affecting, and, you could be triggering something that is not your fault. So hopefully this wasn't a waste of time. If you're still listening, I appreciate it. I'm trying to make this podcast personal and talk about things more than, oh, this is what a fire tube boiler is. This is what a water tube boiler is, and really talk about, what the life of the boiler industry is. And eventually I'll start having some guests on and you won't have to hear me ramble. But I think it's an interesting perspective of being able to give people grace and understanding that if you're a service technician, if you're an operator, welder, whatever, and you are going to a plant or a facility, or you meet somebody and you have to, hey, it's going to be this or it's going to be this or whatnot. They don't always react in a fair manner, and that is not a reflection of what you are doing. As long as you are doing things correctly and on a positive scale, it doesn't reflect on you, and your ability to give them grace and then brush it off and move on will keep your mental health and clarity just clear for, the problems that you have to deal with. And it's all, I mean, it goes both ways. If you're going through a divorce, or your dog died, or you have problems with your kids, or your wife told you she doesn't love you anymore, like, that's all hard stuff. As a male, I can only speak for a male on the male side of it, but as a male, you want to just push all your emotions down and shut down, and everything's fine, I'll be fine and whatnot. But sometimes they can bubble up, but just know to regulate your emotions at the proper time. And if you have to take off work or whatnot, but talk to somebody. But don't try not to pass those emotions onto other people that have no idea what you're dealing with, because they won't feel great, and they may get mad at you, and it can turn into this deal that's not a great situation. But yeah, I mean, it's just, I don't know what we're saying, emotional maturity, I guess, and the ability to give grace, live and let live, and move on. That's probably all I have. And I will try to come up with a boiler topic for the next podcast, something interesting. If you have an interesting topic that you want me to talk about, or a guest to bring on, or somebody, or even if you want to be a guest, you can email me, eric.johnson@boilearn.com, BOILEARN.com. You can also DM me on LinkedIn. If you are not on LinkedIn, get on LinkedIn. But yeah, that's all I have for you today. I appreciate you listening. If you got this far, I hope I was able to land that plane correctly and kind of tie that all into a box that kind of makes sense. Thank you, and stay wild.